All right, we are here with the first mayor of nightlife for New York, Ariel Palitz. What a fascinating title. There's so much we want to dig into, but maybe just start with how you got into nightlife in general. Bring us back to the beginning of your career.
Happy to do it. Happy to be here. Thank you. I basically became New York City's first nightlife mayor, if you will. I always like to say it was my destiny. But really, I grew up, born and raised in New York City, grew up going out, grew up watching my parents going to Studio 54 and hosting huge parties. Socializing is just like a huge part of growing up in the city.
Yeah.
I like to say, as you grow up in New York, you go from like spin the bottle to bottle service. It's sort of just like the natural progression of growing up.
Yeah.
But honestly, I was always really interested in, just the cultural anthropology in a sense. It's sort of a dry answer, but just the interesting aspects of the way people gather, how, why, music, art, dance, and just the freedom that people have. And I sort of observed that at a pretty young age, just going out to clubs and realizing these are my people.
And at what age did you attend your first nightclub?
Probably 14, 15, 16. Again, like there's no like sort of middle ground. You go from the slumber parties to bars.
Right.
And that was okay. And back in the day, like parents really weren't paying attention like they do now to our benefit. So, but yeah, I grew up going out, realized that nightlife was my life in a sense. Started promoting parties really young. I worked at the club called Mars as the girl who used to call people to let them know they were on the guest list.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through that? Because I don't think that exists today.
Well, I mean, yeah, before Instagram and so on, we used to like handwrite flyers and stick stamps on flyers and mail them out to people's mailboxes. And there were street teams, obviously, that would go and hand select people that they thought was their vibe and pass it out to them to join the party. And then there were lists, call lists. And we would call and be like, hi, this is Ariel. I'm calling for Michael Tron to let you know you're going to be on the guest list for Mars tonight. The party's going to be on the roof. And then it was like a big deal to be on the list, right? It was something like necessary to have access. It was really a need to know basis. And you were able to cultivate crowds in a better way.
And how do they source the list? It's just big like finance people or?
No.
No?
I mean, you're cultivating a crowd, cultivating a scene. You want, especially in New York, diversity and quality and creativity. And it's what you're bringing to the party, not what you do for a living or how much money you have. And so I think that's when people think about back in the day and why New York nightlife was so special was because it wasn't, how much money you were going to spend. It was the vibe that you're bringing and creating that sort of, again, a cultivated vibe.
What do you think kind of caused that shift from who you are to how much you're going to spend?
Necessity for the cost of doing business. I mean, things are always ebbing and flowing, right? And I still think people that run quality venues and quality parties still have their eye on quality people. And that doesn't necessarily mean money. I mean, very often, sometimes the people with the most money and the most accolades are the biggest problem. Like entitlement can really ruin a party. And so I think finding people who have a better gauge of the type of people and the kind of party you want to throw is important. And money is always important, not as important as safety and not as important as vibe.
So you work your way up in the promoting scene. What happens after that?
So yeah, I was a promoter for so many years. I used to do this live music open mic jam session called The Solution. And I did it at the Tunnel, Rebar, Anarchy, SOBs. I was actually at SOBs last night for their 40th anniversary. And I had day jobs, working in PR companies, record labels, and just hustling that day-night thing. And eventually I had the opportunity to invest in a bar that was near my house. And I thought it would be so cool to have ownership rather than having to bounce from venue to venue and having to deal with, all the drama that entails.
Politics.
And so, there's so many reasons why that's challenging, especially for women. And so I became an investor in a bar across the street from my house. And it was a great place. It was called The Flat. It was very a lot of stars and Lindsay and Ashton and Demi.
Oh, wow.
But I was the only woman with 7 other guys. And again, they sort of had a different priority. It was really about the stars, and which is all great too.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with a room all full of stars, nobody pays. And so that kind of fizzled out for them, but it gave me the opportunity to take over. And I took over the lease, I took over the liquor license, I renamed it, revamped it, and relaunched it with the debt. And ran it as Sutra Lounge for 10 years.
Wow. And so Sutra, I got some background that you guys were the noisiest venue in New York, right? Is that your claim? One of your claims to fame?
I mean, it's one of the claims to fame for sure. But it is ultimately what activated me and politicized me. And went from party person into politics was because within the first year of me owning my venue, I became the #1 most complained about bar in New York from one chronic caller on the 311 call system, which is anonymous and automated. And clearly I was not the #1 noisiest bar in New York.
Oh, it was just one person repeating.
Over
Gotcha.
and over. And the police would come and they would go to her house. And so it really put me in a position where I had to not only defend myself, but defend the entire system. Being #1 in New York, being a New Yorker, being a nightlifer, we're in a fight.
Do you know how many complaints ballpark?
Oh yeah, hundreds. And it lasted for years.
Wow.
And the problem is that, most enforcement is complaint driven, right? And so you could literally get away with almost anything in New York if you're safe.
Right.
Lives aren't in danger and nobody complains.
Right.
But the minute somebody complains, you could literally have a bench outside your office. And if somebody complains and you don't have a permit for it, you're getting rid of that bench.
Right.
So, especially in New York, I think historically around the world, nightlife hasn't historically been seen as an asset to a city, to a culture, to an economy. It's always been seen as a liability. The freaks come out at night. All bad things happen after dark. And so there's always been this reactive enforcement approach by a city rather than a proactive way of how do we support this culture? How do we help these businesses? How do we help them to be safer? How do we assess whether the person complaining against them is valid? It was always people in nightlife always had never got the benefit of the doubt and had no way to prove their innocence whatsoever. So really for a decade, I joined the community board. I was on the liquor licensing committee.
Oh, wow.
Simultaneously to running my bar. And I just started getting really vocal about how are good and bad operators defined? How do the enforcement agencies interface with the venues? And little did I know that everything I had been through and everything I was fighting for and speaking up for ultimately would lead me to be appointed by Mayor de Blasio as the founding director of a dedicated office to represent and advocate for the industry from within the mayor's office. And so everything I went through informed the programs that I created. One of the first ones was creating MEND, NYC. It stands for Mediating Establishment Neighborhood Disputes. And it's a free mediation program run by the city.
Wow.
Utilized by the police, community boards, elected officials, venue operators, and residents to sit down, put the resident and the venue in one room in the afternoon, not at 3 a.m, having a police officer tell your bar back to turn it down. And then the next day you're audible. And so you're a bad operator.
Right.
Like you're not giving the venue the benefit of the doubt of understanding, oh, is the problem the sound in the front or is it in the back? Is it the people? Is it the bass? You know, how do we negotiate this so that it's mutually beneficial?
In a less stressful moment.
So you said not having complaints and safety is a really big aspect of longevity for venues. You had a 10-year run and then SOB's 40-year run. Like there's some staples of New York that have been around for a long time, but most venues, as you know, are like much on the shorter lived side, hot for like a few years and then they fizzle out. What are some like really key aspects that you think make up like longevity within a venue?
Well, I think a lot of aspects to having longevity in any business, especially in nightlife and hospitality, are just, you know, paying attention. Everything's important. I don't think it's possible not to have complaints and not to have security issues.
Right.
That's not ever going to happen.
Yeah.
You're always going to have complaints, security issues. Anything can happen in nightlife and always does. And it's always the thing you least expect. And so it's not about if something's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen and how you handle it. And that's really the most important thing that even the police and the city want to know. If there's a shooting outside your venue or inside your venue, it's not a question of, you know, what happened, but what happened when it happened? How did you handle it? Did you record the camera, the videos, tapes? Did you give it to the police? Did you cooperate? Because everything that happens after that is really what assesses your level of culpability to a certain extent. So I think, you know, what I tried to do in creating the Office of Nightlife is to create roadmaps and best practices and programs that demystify the process, that take the nightlife industry out of the dark, so to speak, and into the light of being a valid and valued industry that has cooperation from the city rather than having to feel like they're the piggy bank or the whipping post or the enemy.
Right.
So first and foremost, you know, I don't know, a lot of people in New York who run nightlife operations are probably familiar with March operations, which are multi-agency response to community hotspots. It's like a midnight special. People, the police, fire, health, building, state liquor authority, Con Ed, everybody shows up at midnight on a Friday night and they turn on the lights and they ruin Becky's birthday and your waitress is crying and you're getting $30,000 worth of tickets. That's sort of like the regular way the city was approaching. If you had sound complaints or a fight, that's just the general way to handle chronic venues with chronic issues. As a response to that, I created MASH, which is multi-agency support for hospitality. And so I would have leaders from all of those agencies meet every 6 weeks to rethink and redirect, self-direct. How do we interface with nightlife? What are the issues that they're dealing with? How can we help educate them into compliance rather than enforce? Because this is just retaliation. It's not education. It's not improving safety. It's not improving quality of life. So what are we doing here? You know.
Yeah. No, that's super interesting. So you think that the longevity is more influenced by how well they like plan for the worst than like driving demand? I
mean, there's a secret sauce to success in nightlife. It's something that really anyone can try to. It's like star quality. You know, you can try and do everything right, but if you don't have that secret sauce, then you might not be successful. You might not have longevity. But I think that it's a very big recipe. You know, one of them obviously is a genuine love of service and people and hospitality and having the sensitivity of what people want and need, and even before they do. having an understanding of lighting and sound and quality of music and DJs and staff. Like, it's all of the very little things that people, especially in New York, notice.
Right.
We have very high standards and we smell a phony.
Right.
You need authenticity. And so you might be hot for a minute if it's all smoke and mirrors, you know, and you just have models, bottles, celebrities, and, you know, bottle flares. Like, anyone can do that.
Right.
You know, but if you want longevity, then you need to be, you know, an expert in the culture that you are catering to and the community. You have to have direct, like, genuine connection to the demographic.
You have to own a niche demographic rather than trying to cater to everyone with like
I don't know if you have
flashy
to own
bottles.
it. You have to be it. You have to be part of it. You know, you obviously you're a puppet master. But aside from, you know, the aesthetic and the vibe and the quality, which is all really hard to achieve, then you have to become a soldier, right? Running a club or a party with hundreds, thousands of people is a military operation. Even if you hire security, you should have your own post rules, right? I had 25 rules for all of my security on top of the ones that they got from their own company that I hired, right? You can't be on the phone, ever.
Right.
You know, don't roll your eyes. I've fired people for rolling their eyes.
Wow.
You know? So you have to make sure that your security are proactive rather than reactive.
Right.
You can always tell, especially on surveillance, when somebody's up to no good in advance. There's so many telltale signs. It's usually the person you don't think it is and the person you're looking out for, not the guy in the hoodie.
Right.
You know, most of the time.
Interesting.
So you have to be treating your staff, treating your operations, treating the security measures with a sense of detail that, like, you're on the front lines, because it only takes one person to create chaos in a room of 1,000. So you're trying to find that one person that's walking around, bumping into people, trying to start something. You know, there's just so many telltale signs, and properly trained people know that.
Yeah.
You know, but at the Office of Nightlife, we had so many harm reduction measures, right? Especially now. I mean, I don't consider wokeness a negative thing. I like to be awake. I like to be conscious of things that people should be more, you know, have a heightened awareness about. And so as a female bar owner, I was able to look and see a different room sometimes. Sometimes you see a woman dancing against a wall and a guy is dancing on her, not with her, and she looks stressed. So your staff, not just you, your staff needs to be aware how to be a good bystander, to be able to assess when someone's in distress. And so I would just walk up to that person and look at her, be like, are you okay? And then you read their eyes, they're not okay. You just take their hand and you walk away. And the guy's like, okay, whatever. And
I think those situations never get addressed whenever I see them in public. And I feel like I'm on like a episode of like, what would you do? And like, I feel like I have to go up and like do that. But it's so true that it's like, why is the staff of the venue not involved, like breaking this up or getting rid of like the creepy dude in the bar? It's so messed up.
Well, some are, some aren't. I think it's about evolving education, awareness, making it a thing, making it into the, you know, everyday norm of being having bystander training. If you see something, you should absolutely do something anyway. You shouldn't be relying solely on staff, but the staff should be made aware of things like this. We also created the Narcan Behind Every Bar campaign, which is to help address the, you know, they call it overdosing, but I really see it as a poisoning. I think the overdose word sometimes is misleading. People are not trying to do fentanyl. They're not taking too much of the fentanyl. They're being poisoned by it. But usually if there was any drug use in a venue, that would be an automatic criminalization of the venue.
Really?
Yeah, you have drugs in your venue, you're gonna get a ticket or shut down. Now the city works more closely in partnership with venues and sees them as the the place where people can look out for each other and help save lives. So with the Department of Health, we got free Narcan kits to go into the first aid kits, free training. And now bartenders, security can actually, if somebody goes down in your venue, you have the ability to save a life and to be seen as a partner with the city and not necessarily as the one who has liability.
That's amazing. On that note of partnership with the city, you've been through multiple mayor's offices and now the COVID pandemic. Talk about like how you've seen the government's involvement within the nightlife space in New York fluctuate over the past few years.
Well, I mean, right now we have a mayor that loves nightlife, which is amazing. I mean, I know sometimes he gets grief in the paper. He's going out too much. He goes out more than me. Like he should be working. New York is a 24-hour city.
Yeah.
And it should be managed and governed in a 24-hour way. A lot of the problems that like nightlife businesses faced was that they were dealing with daytime rules. And so, you know, having a mayor that loves the nightlife is great. If you go back to the Giuliani era and the shutting down of the tunnel and large format clubs, that hatred, that criminalization of the industry has led to decades of problems. It's probably why there's an Office of Nightlife now, is to reverse some of those enforcement forward approaches like March operations, for example. So I think that the pandemic was actually obviously a direct blow to social gatherings and social spaces. It was a virus that spread in social spaces. But it also was something that really helped me in my job, which was to reframe a framed industry as an asset, not a liability, as something that is necessary to the culture, economy, and identity of a city. And when the pandemic hit and nightclubs were the first places to close, restaurants were the first to close, that's when like the realization set in, like we might not ever have spaces to socialize and gather. And we got a glimpse of a world of what it would be like not to have these really special, magical places where cultures and subcultures are built and friendships are made and places where people celebrate and mourn and find love, especially in marginalized communities, the LGBTQ communities, people who are addicts. We saw relapse, we saw depression, we saw suicidal tendencies, we saw, you know, really how valuable it was. And so it wasn't just evident to me, I think it was evident to the government as well. Like, wow, this is a $35.1 billion industry that supports 300,000 jobs and funds $700 million in tax revenue for our city that is shut down overnight.
Wow.
And so, you know, even before, like the police, you know, relationships of them coming in, you know, with this like intense adversarial energy, I think everything softened. We had this collective suffering that I think humanized everybody, including this industry. And I think as negative and painful as it was, it has helped tremendously to create empathies, which in turn creates strategies that are positive rather than reactive.
What do you see as the biggest shift in New York nightlife between pre-COVID and post-COVID?
Gratitude.
Gratitude, yeah.
I think before everyone was just like, oh, I miss the old New York. New York was so cool back in the day. New York sucks now. And now everyone's like, actually, New York's the
It feels super alive. Yeah, being
you
in
know,
space, yeah.
like being able to have that appreciation. You don't know what you've got until it's gone kind of thing. I think, again, the collective suffering and all that isolation created a lot of brainstorming, creativity. God, when I get out, I'm going to do this. And appreciation for each other. You know, that whole, even that sort of greater sensitivity to mental health that before had so much more stigma. The Office of Nightlife created Elevate Nightlife Mental Health, where people could really start talking about not just the traumas of the pandemic, but the traumas of what it's like to work at night. You know, you're like a shift worker that's working in an emergency room. You've got pop-ups of violence. You've got, alcohol, testosterone, ego. You've got, eating breakfast at midnight and dinner at 5 a.m. and
Right.
the lack of awareness of the importance of self-care
Right.
in nightlife is, I think and hope that people are, and what we tried to do in the office was to make people more aware of self-care and daycare for nightlife workers is what we called it.
How does the office stay on top of like understanding the culture? Obviously, you're all veterans within the space, but once you have an office job during the day, it must be difficult to understand what are the new hot spots at night and what the club kids are into and stuff like that. Is there a strategy you have for kind of like staying in the center of the culture?
Well, I mean, I go out all
Still
the
go out
time.
a lot, yeah.
Yeah, still, because I love it.
Yeah.
I'm not in this position now, but even when the next person is appointed, I think the real, one of the main things is to make sure that people know the Office of Nightlife exists. That's why I'm really grateful to be sharing on these type of platforms, because it's still a continuous education. Like, what's the Office of Nightlife? What does it do? How can it help me? To know that there's a dedicated non-enforcement office there. There's, over 27,000 liquor licensed venues, and there's all kinds of things happening in the shadows all the time. And it's not even possible for an Office of Nightlife even to know where everything's going on. What it needs is people to trust it.
So just for the
and
viewers,
to reach out.
for the viewers watching, non-enforcement. Great
Means
point
we
too.
we don't fine, ticket, we don't, we're not capable of taking your license away. It's a safe place for you to talk about real things that are going down, and to have people who've been in the industry and who are within the administration to find ways to resolve the issue. Not to absolve you of illegality, but if you find yourself in a situation where if you were if you had trouble with the police, you don't necessarily want to call the police. If you have trouble with the fire department, you don't necessarily want to call the fire department. But you can call the Office of Nightlife as this neutral entity that can help you resolve the issue and help navigate you into a better place. And so that's why it's meant to be a trusted place. But it's really important that the promoters, the DJs, the venue operators know that they have a place to go. And when there have been times where there was an LGBTQ venue that had somebody walk in with a gallon of gasoline and douse it all over the floor and light it. They called the Office of Nightlife, or we hear about it in the news and we reach out to them and put like a blanket around them as far as like wraparound services, mental health support for the staff and patrons, business grant support, helping them through, navigating agencies. So I think it's important to obviously always be out there and have your ear to the ground, but more so that they know you're there in case they need you.
I think an interesting new kind of entity that we work a lot with here is like the nightlife hospitality group, right? These like communities that don't necessarily own a venue or anything. They just pop up at different venues. It's kind of like a promoter of today. They're building communities through social media and things. Did the office, when you were there, try to build for them, or mainly for venues?
Well, I think the way that the Office of Nightlife can help communities that are not necessarily venue-based, promoters, event planners, DJs, artists, performers, it is really there for everyone. Venues just tend to be the conduit in which all those things come through. And so if you have a healthy venue that has safety and compliance and consciousness in its, mix, then everyone else can benefit from that. But I think during COVID, what we really saw was a lot of these organizations popping up that aligned. All of a sudden, everyone that used to be competitive were aligning to speak with one voice. So you had NYC Nightlife United, you had Save NYC Bars, you had Babar in Brooklyn, which was pre-pandemic. So I think it's incredible when the industry and the community align, organize, speak with one voice, and then you're able to meet with them and know that you're reaching the needs and the priorities of that community. And it's the obligation, I think, of those communities and organizations, as well as the office, to find each other
Right.
and to listen and to amplify what they need, and then create citywide programs if need be, do town halls to talk around issues around accessibility, equity, justice, racist door policies, hiring practices that people have. There's so many more conversations that need to be had with venue operators and promoters and DJs. This is not just about having a fun party that's making a lot of money where nobody dies.
Right. Yeah.
These are opportunities for real social justice, real social change. It helps you have the attention of hundreds of people, thousands of people. Remember when the straw ban came into effect? It's like, how do I drink without a straw? It was so mind-boggling to them. But just the banning of plastic straws was able to create this whole sustainability consciousness around plastic with thousands of people, millions of people. So
that's really interesting. I think on the point of social justice, a theme you brought up a few times is being a successful woman in this space, which is extremely important. We don't see many of those. What do you think, women need to do to be successful in this space, and that men need to do to help, curate a more fair environment?
I mean, I don't think women really need men's help.
Right. No, but to downplay themselves, or what can they do? What are they doing that's not allowing women to succeed?
I think there's a lot of really incredible, strong women doing incredible things in nightlife. I think hiring more women promoters and DJs, highlighting. But I also think we're almost past the point of where there needs to be a separate platform for lady DJ night. It's just should be integrated naturally. Yeah. Whether it's women, whether it's trans, whether it's whatever it is, that is the strength of New York nightlife, is our diversity. If you're looking around your club and you don't have it, then your party sucks, in my opinion. Yeah. You need to make a conscious effort to have a conscious venue. You need to make sure that you understand, especially now more than ever, how can you cater to the needs and sensitivities of your audience without being, overly attentive in a sense. It's just always about evolving.
Being conscious, not trying to overdo it.
Yeah. And I think that's what the evolution of New York nightlife and nightlife in general around the world, we've all learned a lot more about each other and what our boundaries are and what our needs are and how we socialize and what's going to make it a more meaningful experience. It's not, obviously, we see there's a real big movement away from just alcohol-based socializing. There's more experiential, there's more competitive, game-based. There's, so many different ways that we can socialize, but you have to know people and care about people. To be able to create that in an authentic way.
Yeah, for sure.
Any advice to the young promoter out there that wants a similar career path to yourself?
Well, any young promoter that, or entrepreneur that is interested in this path, first of all, starting to throw parties and run a nightclub can lead you all the way to the mayor's office. So I think it's important to know that people who run nightlife and venues, they're basically ninjas, especially if you've really been battle tested through it. You have eyes all around your head. Every single finger is a blade and your instincts are like Spider-Man. And so you can literally go to the moon. You could do anything once you've done that, because you have to have heightened sense of awareness and attention and care for everything all the time. But I think that it has to be a calling. I think it has to be something that's authentic, an authentic love of people, music, DJs, culture, and to be a perfectionist about it. It's a craft, it's a skill. You should always, even if you understand there's blurred lines around legalities and so forth, always do your best to have clean hands, because, and always have safety first. always look out for people who are your friends or the people with the Grammys, because those are the people that are usually the ones that think they can get away with anything. You know, be responsible for everyone in your control. That's your barbacks, your bussers, your servers. All of those people are your chosen family. You have to look out for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think people just respond to, you know, professionalism and authenticity and a care for people's well-being. And if you can achieve that, you will have longevity. It will last, you know, lead you to incredible places, because it's all about relationship building, and you never know. I would also just say, like, I at Sutra always made sure to give all up-and-coming DJs and promoters a chance. I think this whole trend with, like, how many followers do you have? And, like, you can't get a night unless you've got, like, all this madness, you know?
Right.
People would come in all the time to Sutra, and I would give them a break and give them a slow night or give them the downstairs. You know, I gave D Nice one of his first gigs, and then
wow.
all of a sudden he's club quarantine DJing, you know, Obama's inauguration.
Yeah.
Like, you have to, I think, have a responsibility to cultivate talent and not just look for, you know, the one who's going to bring the most bodies. And I think,
Totally.
you know, looking for quality and talent and creativity is what's going to set you apart from everyone else.
That's great advice. Yeah. Quick game before we wrap up. We're going to give you a neighborhood. Every time we give you a neighborhood, give us a venue that we should be on the lookout for.
I don't like that.
All right, better game.
My favorite place is the one that's closest, where my friends are DJing, owns it, or I'm not going to have drama getting in the door.
What's your go-to spot right now?
A lot of pressure on.
It's a lot of pressure. I mean, I think everyone's doing an incredible job, not to be overly political about it, but I just think, you know, it's really important that we visit the legacy places that everybody would be so sad if they were closed. Everyone's like, oh man, I can't believe it closed. It's like, well, have you gone there recently? Like, I just had dinner at Indochine and went to Temple Bar. These are places that have been around for decades that we almost lost during the pandemic. And I think it's just, if you love a place, a local place, your friend's place, then you should just literally be going and supporting with your dollars, and don't always ask for a free drink.
Yeah.
You wouldn't go into your friend's clothing store and ask for a free pair of jeans.
Totally.
You know, and just because it's liquid doesn't mean that it doesn't have, you know, that they don't have to be compensated.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're not loved. Let them tell you.
I love that. And I love that you not being able to choose a favorite kind of speaks to, like, equality is a really big aspect for you and wanting to represent all the venues that are in the city. So that's great. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We had a really good time. I also learned a ton. I didn't even know that the mayor's office existed before we got this set up. So.
I also didn't know that the industry was $35 billion. So we're going to tell our investors that.
35.1.
35.1. There we go. All right. Well, thank you.
My pleasure.
All right.
Cheers.